Hello everyone, welcome back to Asturis in City Skylines. We started the series last time by building the space elevator. It is a large building in the middle of the bay, which is going to have lots of offices and industry as the city progresses. It has the magnetic flying trains going to it, as well as cargo barges. Today we will move to land, to the end of the flying train's rings, where we will start building the heart of Asturis, which is going to be the main transportation hub with lots of tracks and levels. Let's go. We are going to start with that high-speed railway, which I already introduced in the previous episode. It's just going to be a completely straight line from one end of the map to the other, and it's just going to cut through all the ridges, it's going to have lots of tunnels, and obviously lots of bridges. For this purpose, I am using the Ronix's Shinkansen tracks, which are looking really good, especially the catenaries are really nicely detailed. And later I'm going to select a very nice looking train as well. And we are going to use 4 tracks in total. I wasn't exactly sure at this point, but we are going to do 4 tracks and actually 6 in the actual station part, so that we can have 2 platforms and like 2 sets of track to just go through the station. But right now I just prepared 4 because I kind of just needed to, get some idea how wide they are going to be and overall how it's going to look and define the levels and everything. So overall, I think the station is going to have 5 different levels or 6. I'm not exactly sure right now, but we are today only going to focus on the trains. The station is definitely not going to be finished after today because it's just a huge project. It's going to take us a really long time to completely do it. Now, this level though, this one is going to be the most important because that's going to be the local, like, urban service, right? So for this, I'm using just the tracks with the gravel, which is, not exactly like super futuristic, but I'm intentionally doing that because I just want to use a different color for, the surface below the tracks. Obviously, I'm just using the concrete or pavement for the high-speed railway, which is, that's kind of how it's supposed to be. But these local service tracks, they are perfectly fine with the gravel. And I especially need that because of that contrast in colors. Like I mentioned in the previous episode, I really want to pay attention to that aspect of Asturis. I just really want to do the colors right. Or at least, so that it's kind of visible at first glance, the different levels. Obviously, if they all had the same colors, then you couldn't really tell. So if you immediately just see a screenshot of the station, it's going to just scream, verticality, lots of levels and stuff. So yeah, that's the reason. Anyway, network multi-tool, that's a huge tool that I'm using in here because it's just absolutely amazing. Especially the parallel tool, as you can see here, that's just super essential for these kinds of stations and rail yards and everything going forward. I will use that a lot more, even in Altengrad, because not only I can do this much quicker, but also much more precise. I can actually use like realistic proportions of, for example, the offsets between the platforms and the tracks and between the tracks and all that. So this is just absolutely amazing. And later I'm going to be using the network multi-tool for the pathing as well for the tracks, because we are kind of going to define some basic shapes of the railways pretty much on the rest of the map. So that's going to be absolutely essential, to have that. And at this point, I was already pretty much done with the basic shapes of just the straight rails throughout the station. So as you can see, I'm not really making the train station symmetrical, right? I'm just making, well, I mean, the high-speed railway kind of, yeah, but the local service down below, not really. And that's absolutely intentional. I was not exactly sure how to do it at first. I downloaded a couple of station buildings from the workshop, but even though they are absolutely huge, I kind of wanted to have the station much bigger. So in the end, I figured that it's not really going to look that great if I'm going to do it super symmetrical. And like I mentioned even before, even in the previous episode, I really want to continue that slightly chaotic style of Aurelia because it's just much more interesting. There is some kind of beauty in asymmetry in these kinds of projects. So I definitely want to continue that. So the station, and by the way, this is something that I really like in real life. It's just super interesting, like, you know, the infrastructure is super interesting when railways are in some kind of a configuration where you have, for example, multiple directions that are just converging into the train station, and you have a couple of platforms that are just curved, and maybe even a couple of platforms that are just like for terminus, you know, stations or stops for the trains. So that's also going to be all included in here. Also, we are going to have cargo trains going through the station. I'm probably going to mention that later, or maybe not, I'm not sure, but that's the reason why I have like 4 tracks in the middle in here, because 2 of them are obviously going to be the outer ones that are going to be to the platform, you know, to the platform for the local passenger trains. But we also have a through option so that the cargo doesn't need to, you know, obstruct the passenger service. This is exactly what I was talking about, defining the shape of the railway going basically off the map. There are not really gonna be that many stations for trains, at least. I mean, the high speed, there's gonna be just this station, makes sense. You don't really have that frequent stops for high speed trains. And the local service, I'm actually going to treat it as some kind of a surface metro. I'm later even going to add those third powered rails, but for different reasons, really. I'm probably going to mention that. And I'm not really trying to have like super frequent stops. It's probably going to be super similar to Aurelia in this regard. I definitely want to have trams fill those smaller gaps again, just like in Aurelia, or kind of like in real life as well. You don't really have these kinds of trains or metros stop all that super frequently. Even though, like I mentioned before, the city is going to be kind of scaled down because that's just how it needs to be in City Skylines. So maybe I could do a couple more stations, then would be super realistic. But, you know, we build a space elevator, so I'm not exactly aiming for realism, am I? Anyway, I'm doing these kinds of all the switches and turns into the platforms because we have a lot of tracks inside the station, and we all need to continue them and connect them, right? Not every single track is going to be connected. Probably most of the track are going to be just for decoration, even though I am planning the number of platforms so that it actually fits the number of lines going through the station. So I am going to add a couple of tracks where I'm just going to add like props of the trains, so they are going to look like they're stopped there. But at this point, I wasn't really caring about it too much. I'm pretty sure I'm not even showing that in the time-lapse, how I was making the station tracks, and I obviously had to make them actually connected to the rest of the network. But at this point, I'm using the network multi-tool, and it's not connecting these tracks. So for example, what I'm doing right here, this node in here is not going to be connected, right? So I need to do that manually if I want to have the actual trains just continue there. I'm not really sure if recent versions of Network Multi-Tool already do that, probably not still. But anyway, that's not really important. That's like a tiny detail. What's most important is that now we can just create all these curves and switches like really easily, and it's just going to look super good. All the radii are actually going to be, you know, reasonable, like realistic even, because I can literally see them in here, what kind of values I'm doing for these curves. And I am trying to make it like reasonable for some kind of metro service or, you know, urban train service. So it's all just looking really good, and all thanks to this one tool. If I didn't have Network Multi-Tool, I would probably not even build this station, because I would probably go crazy from doing all these curves. But at the same time, I do want to have curves at the station because it's just making it so much more interesting. If it was completely symmetrical and completely straight tracks, then that would just be so boring. I kind of wanted to do that at first, but when I started plopping down these tracks, it was just immediately apparent that I need to experiment with some asymmetry, that I need to experiment with lots of different geometry, and above all, just not do it symmetrical. Even though I do want to keep some symmetry here and there, especially for the high-speed railway. That's kind of looking nice. And looking at it now, it's actually kind of logical, because on the surface where roads are going to be and like buses and stuff, that's probably going to be the biggest chaos, right? There are going to be just tight turns for the roads and just how they're going between the buildings and everything. Then we are going to go slightly higher where trams are going to be, which is going to be slightly less chaotic. then these trains, which is going to be even less chaotic, even though, some asymmetry obviously is still here. And then we have the high-speed railway, which is like straight, kind of symmetrical, even though the platforms are going to be slightly off. And then on the very top, we are going to do the flying train, which is actually going to look like it's been kind of tagged on to the place, because it's obviously the newest addition to the entire station. And that's just going to look like it's not exactly fitting the place because it's just been built after everything has been already done and no one really planned for it, right? So it's going to look like that. Now, at this end of the station, I really wanted to experiment with different levels. So you could have seen me plan that path into the industrial zone, future industrial zone. That particular path that I did there was actually going to be for the cargo because it's leading to that temporary harbor. But, there is going to be an actual harbor there. So doing the cargo railway there is obviously making sense. But at the start here at the station, I'm going to split the railways into many different directions, but they're kind of going to share the same path for a while, but they are going to slowly just split into multiple levels. And I'm especially looking forward to building that sloped area near that ridge, near those hills, because I'm probably going to build some partial tunnels in there, something like that. Going to experiment with lots of natural detailing and maybe even a couple of buildings here on the waterfront. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to look great. Also here making sure that I'm kind of keeping the grades reasonable. So using 1% for what's going to be the cargo railway and going slightly higher for the passenger services. Now, like I said, these are going to be some kind of metro trains going in here, so they are going to be absolutely fine with grades even much higher than this. So that's going to hopefully be fine. As you can see, I'm just doing the path of the railway, even though maybe I'm going to keep it this way, but there are no pillars, no borders or anything like that. That's obviously going to be built once I actually get to this place and gonna start building some kind of building blocks like actual streets and everything on the surface, because that's going to be clear how it then needs to continue. Right now, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do these kinds of railways, if I'm going to keep some kind of corridors open for them, or if I'm going to perhaps make buildings right next to the railways, even partially forming supports for the railways or something, like super high density style. I'm not really sure about that. I'm going to see where the series is going to take me, basically. But these paths for the railways, I definitely want to have them prepared at this point already, mostly because of the heights. I obviously cannot just go up and down like on a roller coaster with these. So it already needs to be somewhat set, and the positions of the bridges over rivers need to be already set. And this is all just, just me making sure that I am prepared for the future expansion of the city. Like I said before, I didn't plan that much in Aurelia, so this time I kind of want to, avoid some mistakes related to zero planning of these kinds of infrastructure projects, so that we can just afford to have them really extensive and just working, kind of making sense in the rest of the city. All right. So anyway, while I was explaining that, I almost finished this level for the tracks. Now I was just doing some kind of outer platforms, and now we are finally going to start doing some structures, because obviously this station is going to be completely customized. I'm not going to make it functional just yet, because the city doesn't have any people, so it doesn't make sense. I mean, it does have now because of the temporary structures, but at the end of this episode, we are actually going to go back to 0 population. And we are going to add some population later to the city. Right now, it's not really important, it's all the trains that matter, right? But anyway, I wasn't really sure how to do the buildings. Oh yeah, I was saying that this station is completely customized, so there is no station building. So we need to provide some station building. We are only going to have station tracks, but the actual buildings where people might, I don't know, buy tickets or wait for the trains or, some kind of railway administration, whatever, that's obviously something that we need to add. And I want to have it completely customized, right? So I was thinking that this station is going to be some kind of a pit, something like the crater in Aurelia. So we're just going to have these open tracks, as open as possible, so that I can just see the vehicles just moving in there. That's the most satisfying part, of course. But then I figured that I mean, I kind of am going to make this into a pit, but I would really like to do not really super tall structures around the entire station, so that the buildings around the station, the slightly shorter buildings, are going to stand out a tiny bit more. We are going to do like super tall skyscrapers somewhere else in the city. Well, not really far away, but somewhere else, not exactly directly here. And the main dominant of the train station is going to be this curved building. We already did the curves on the railway, so might as well do them with the buildings. And, there isn't a better building to do curves with than these roundabout buildings. There are actually many different types. I believe that this one is the commercial version. There are also the residential, but they were not exactly fitting this place. And again, the colors. These buildings are blue. They have basically completely blue walls with just the window panels or some kind of, aluminum panels maybe or something. But it's just looking great. Absolutely perfect for this purpose. It actually does look like a station already. But I just customized the shape to make it into like an S curve somewhat and really fit it onto the entire place. I also scaled it up slightly and then I kind of made it fit. That building also has like a cutout towards the bottom where it only has pillars and the actual building is kind of slightly recessed inside. So that's absolutely perfect for some kind of entrance or like a plaza in front of it. It's all kind of coming together. It's kind of surprising that sometimes when I choose buildings into these projects, they just completely fit, even though I didn't exactly plan it. But it kind of gives me like a confirmation that that's just how it needs to be, right? So that's the building. Also on the side there, facing the elevator, I placed that. So that's a real life building. I forgot where from. Doesn't really matter. It looks like a honeycomb kind of. And it's a perfect end to that S-shaped station building, right? That's going to be like a start of some kind of a block maybe, or like a line of slightly taller structures or as tall as that one. That is just going to go all the way to the waterfront that's facing the elevator. By the way, I'm intentionally keeping this area open so that when you are going to get off, especially the high-speed railway, you're going to stand on the platform, then you are going to look directly at the space elevator and there's going to be just like a park, like a line that's going to be completely empty of buildings. There's only going to be the flying train, the pillars for it or something. And you will just see the space elevator in its full glory, right? So I don't want to put any kind of buildings in there. And, vice versa. If you are standing at the platforms of the elevator, you are just easily going to see all the way to the train station. So that's going to be kind of nice. And if you are driving or riding the flying train, then you can just, observe exactly where you're going. So that was the point of doing this connection to the main station from the elevator completely straight. So I'm just test fitting a couple of other buildings around the station because at this point I wasn't exactly sure how the buildings are going to look around it, but eventually it started to kind of fit into all the different places. I'm definitely heavily trying to use buildings that have non-standardized shapes because the station also isn't exactly having like straight lines around it, so it only makes sense that the buildings are going to be looking like they are customized to fit the station, right? Now, where were we? Right, so let's talk about the flying train some more, because I'm finally starting to make some kind of stations for it. At first, I thought that it's just going to go completely straight, all the way from the space elevator, all the way to some kind of platforms for it. But then it occurred to me, why? Because I'm already doing two different lines into the space elevator, symmetrical obviously at the elevator itself. But it doesn't really make sense that they all go to the same place, right? Because what would be the reason to choose one over the other? Maybe if this was real life, then the trains would be done so that one is at the elevator, the other is at the station, and they are just going back and forth so that they're only going to meet, halfway there, something like that. So if you just didn't catch the first one, then you're just going to go to the other side and board the other one. But then I figured that this station is going to be huge. It's going to be just absolutely gigantic. And maybe it might be a good idea to actually have these flying trains go into different ends of this train station. Because Also, if you are going to this station or into Asturis from outside world or something, from different cities or the countryside or whatever, then you are going to end up at different places of the station, right? You are going to end up at those terminus stations, for example, or you are going to arrive by a bus or a tram or something, or just on foot from different parts of the city. So it might make sense that you are going to just board the closest flying train. So that's what I'm doing here. I made this little curve, because at the space elevator we also have curves for, at the ends of the flying train. So it makes perfect sense. And we are going to have the blue line here go over the high-speed railway and on top of that building that's kind of just sandwiched between the upper high-speed rail and those terminus stations for the metro lines down below. So, and again, that building is absolute perfect fit because it's slightly angled on one side, which is exactly what we have going on that high-speed railway, because there is like a turn into a switch from the platform, right? So yeah, this building right here, it's a perfect fit. By the way, this is a detail made by CityWalk. I believe this is a prop for the Hyperloop, which I kind of considered to put in this place, but eventually didn't. And then it's just going to be animated there. It's like a nice effect in that place. And having the flying train station, by the way, it's going to be a tiny, tiny station for that flying train on top of that building. It's going to kind of tell you or give you the idea that they really did not plan the station with the flying train in mind, right? Because it's like something completely new, completely futuristic. So it's just kind of glued on to the station wherever we had some little tiny space left still, right? So I think that's a really good fit for that. Like I said, right now we are not really going to have the station functional, but later I'm going to just put so many different pedestrian paths through so many different options or paths through the entire station so that pedestrians are going to be just walking all around it. But right now, no point in that because the population is just not really there yet. Also, speaking of colors, I did these surfaces. I'm not exactly sure if this green is going to stay, but I already started doing it somewhere else in the city as a continuation of this station, basically. No spoilers. But it's kind of fitting. I tried like blue, orange or something, but it was not exactly all that great. And this particular color is really fitting well with those roofs, the shelters over the platforms, which are impossible to recolor. So yeah, I think I'm going to keep that. And I also intentionally added those like contrasty trees there, which are just yellow and red. And overall, it's just looking really great. I also paid attention to select a contrasty trains. So for the high speed, we are just going to take the Italian high-speed trains, which are just like wine or blood red or something, which is a huge contrast to the gray tracks. And on the contrary, down there for the metro lines, I picked something which has like a white or gray roof, which is just going to be a contrast to the gravel of that level. So overall, it's just it's just visible that there is actually something different color is moving on those tracks. So overall, that's kind of the reason. Doing some detailing there for that flying train station up there, doing some kind of a roof, benches, some kind of vending machines, and some kind of futuristic vending machines as well. And overall, just doing these kinds of like little details. Even though at this point I didn't really want to commit that much into detailing the station because it's not going to be complete, and maybe things are still going to change. This is the other direction that we definitely needed to define already at this point, because these are the tracks that are leading to this terminus part of the station. Even though there are a couple of options for trains to actually go past that portion, you can see those switches there by the rings or below the rings pretty much, so that trains can actually continue past the station as well. But there's going to be another bridge over the other river, so huge opportunities to do all kinds of nice little projects going into the future. So these are the finished cinematics, and it looks good. It looks good. I have to say that it actually looks good. I really like how the trains are moving in here. I'm going to like it 100 times more when people are finally going to be standing on platforms, boarding the trains and just, going into different parts of the city and so on. So these are all the levels. Well, not really all the levels. So we are going to build, obviously, the surface levels and the tram levels in the next episode. We are going to focus on that very wedge between the tracks, where I would like to continue with some kind of a tram terminal. So that's going to be the topic of the next part. But obviously the station is not going to be finished by that. It's just going to take us a real long time to tackle this beast, because all around it there are so many different places that we need to continue. But anyway, guys, that is going to be all for episode 2 of Asturis. Definitely stay tuned to episode 3 and all the others that are going to come after them. So, thank you for watching this episode. Hope you liked it. If you did, then you can do the usual thumbs up, subscribes, comments, sharing the video as well. And if you really like this, you can become a channel member, support the channel directly. Big thanks to all the channel members that we currently have. Really appreciate it, guys. All right, that's all. Thank you again. Take care and goodbye.